Wow, the jokes have been on fire. I would tell you a joke about a migration, but I think it would take too long. So anyway, thank you very much for having me. I'm sure we've all seen our fair share of migrations in our careers, some probably more successful than others. And if you've ever struggled with a technical migration, I'm here to tell you that you are not alone, because migrations are hard. And I'm like the third speaker to use as metaphor today, but it's true, because it's really easy to start out thinking that it's going to be the straight line to the end, where everything is going to be better right away. But in reality, it's often a lot more like this. You know, this uphill path full of twists and turns and surprises. Unforeseen hiccups, bends in the road, and interruptions that take your focus away. And what looks like a very short distance that actually takes a lot longer to cover than you might have thought. And I'm going to talk to you about the bends in the road that we faced embarking on a big technical migration, how we navigated them, and some of the lessons that we learned. And also how to know whether you should be doing a technical migration at all. My name is Sophie. I'm a senior engineer and web discipline lead at Monzo, which is a bank based in London. I have a website, occasionally write about tech, mostly just write about recipes, and you can find me in various places around the internet. Now, Monzo is a bank that lives on your phone and makes managing your money super easy, so we hope. We're big in the UK, known for our brightly coloured cards. We're also growing in the US, and we've got plans to move into the EU in the near future as well, so keep your eyes open. But as an app-based bank, that's what our product is, right? We're a phone app. But we do actually do web things as well. So we have a website. Most companies do these days. And that's where you can see all of our product information, view help articles, things like that. We've also got a web banking app for our business customers, where you can do things like view transactions, manage your money, and make payments, all of that fun stuff. We've also got a massive suite of internal tooling, the largest of which is a big customer service application called BizOps. And this is where our customer service team can do anything they need to help customers out. So chat, email, calls, anything that they need to do on people's accounts to solve their problems. And as you can imagine, this is very complex. Now, we recently migrated our web properties to Typescript, and it took a really long time. This is actually the sticker that we got made after it was finished. If any of you in the room have undergone a similar process, I've actually got some stickers with me if you want to find me afterwards. It actually took us just over 2 years, which is, but spoiler alert, it actually came out pretty well in the end. But needless to say, migrations are not without challenge, especially in an organization of our size. So before TypeScript, we were using Flow, which is Facebook's type system. But ultimately, TypeScript became a lot more popular, and increasingly we were finding that the libraries we were using didn't have flow types anymore, which was making it very difficult to upgrade. On top of that, the Flow server crashed constantly, and we're using Next.js for a lot of our stuff. They released a new version at the time with a new compiler that used Rust, and we couldn't use it because we were stuck using Babel, which we needed to transpile Flow. It was something that we'd kind of talked on and off about for a while, along the lines of, we should probably do this at some point, but it was starting to get too difficult to upgrade some of our tooling because of Flow. But we knew that it wouldn't be as simple as just running a code mod across the whole repo, because for one thing, there was just so much code. So it can seem really intimidating when you're right at the beginning and you've got this whole massive job ahead of you. Like, where do you even start? Well, you start small. In our case, we put a couple of engineers on it as a little side project. So they had to have a look on the internet to see what they could find, what other people had done. Had a bit of a hack to see if they could migrate one package. And then when they migrated that, could they get that building alongside the rest of our code? Now, Flow to TypeScript is a really well-trodden path at this point. Like, a lot of people have done it. And in fact, a while after we started, Stripe open sourced their Flow to TypeScript migration code as well. So with things like this, it's always worth seeing what other people have been doing to see if you can just kind of use what they've been putting on GitHub and things like that and save yourself some time. You want to prove that this can work before you commit yourself to doing anything, because if you try and get buy-in before you've even really had a chance to do anything, you run the risk of just being shut down before you've even started. And without a really clearly defined plan and timeline, you're basically asking people with very little context to let you focus on what they might think is a less important maintenance piece over prioritized teamwork. And so it's really important in your organization to have that space to experiment with something before you need to go and make a case for it. So time box that exploration effort, communicate your progress really clearly, and keep a log of any decisions that led to you choosing a particular path or technology, because someone in the future is going to thank you for it, whether that's someone else doing something similar further down the line, or you in 6 months going, what on earth was I thinking? So yeah, document the hell out of everything from the start. And for every new engineer who joins your team, you're going to need to get them up to speed with what's going on and how they can get involved. I actually left Monzo in 2021 and I came back in mid-2022, which is a story for the pub. But when I left, they were just looking at the Typescript migration and the feasibility and starting to have a bit of a hack. And when I came back, it was in full swing. So I needed to understand what's going on and how do I actually get involved. And the team had put together this whole Notion space with all the information that I could possibly have needed, with information about what the milestones were and what the process was for actually contributing. So your documentation should cover every aspect of the migration, past, present, and future. So you should treat it like a project, because of course your projects are all meticulously documented, I assume. But you need to make it really easy for someone with no context to see what's going on. So once you've decided to go ahead, who actually does the work? Like, should you have one team working on nothing but the migration? Or should you split it across different teams and having them collaborate? Well, in an ideal world, you'd have one team focusing on the migration and nothing else, because this vastly reduces the risk of things not getting done. They can just do it. But we don't live in an ideal world. If you're sharing the work amongst lots of different teams, that removes the need to ring-fence one team, but it does take a lot longer. And ultimately, you're at the mercy of other teams' planning cycles, because realistically, this work is never going to take priority over what they've already prioritized. And the bigger your organization gets, the more complicated this becomes. If you're driving the migration centrally, you can just do it for them. So in our world, we didn't have the luxury of one central team doing the migration, so we centralized the work amongst the teams that had web developers. And we started with just a small group of volunteers doing it as a little side project, and we knew that it would probably take a while. So how should you tackle the work itself? Should you do it all at once, or should you do it bit by bit? When you're doing the work shared across multiple teams like we were, you don't really have much of a choice. You have to do it incrementally. But if you do have the luxury of a dedicated team doing that work, you can choose. Some things like React upgrades do need to go all in one, right? You can't have multiple versions of that running in the app. If you're doing kind of a re-platform onto a new static site generator or something, you might want to do it all at once, just so you don't have multiple build steps to mess with or something like that. It makes a lot of sense if your code base is a lot smaller. A big bang migration is a lot quicker, but it is inherently riskier the larger your code base gets. If there's an incident, and there will be an incident, it makes it a lot easier to identify what's gone wrong and roll back if you're only migrating a little bit at a time. It's a much safer approach. Now, we have a monorepo where all of our apps use React. Some of them have Next, and all of them at the time were using Flow. And changes to libraries within that monorepo can affect lots of different apps. And we couldn't afford to just migrate the whole thing and just yeet it into production when our ability to service our customers depends on these apps working. So we knew we had to be very careful. The flip side is that incremental migrations are very easy to abandon. So you have to be very disciplined and you have to make sure that you keep going. It can be really challenging to maintain that enthusiasm and pace, as we discovered. But there's a real risk here that you go bit by bit and something else comes along, and then you put it on pause, only to never resume it. And of course, like with any migration, we hit a bend in the road pretty soon. We had a lot of contributors to our repository across the business, not all of them web engineers. And when contributing to the repo, people would copy and paste old Flow code to create new packages, increasing the amount of flow when we were trying to get that number down. Rude. We needed to make it so much easier to build the new things in TypeScript that it would be the only obvious option. And we did that with tooling. We wrote new tooling that would allow you to bootstrap a new package in TypeScript, a package generator. And this removed a lot of the manual steps that engineers didn't like in the first place. And that meant that all of the new stuff coming in was TypeScript. We could have also added some static checks here using something like semgrep, which would have detected if people were adding new flow code into the repository and refused to let people merge their PRs. If you're deprecating a library, a specific library, things like ESLint is really good for that. You can prevent it from letting you merge things that have, say, imports from a library that you don't want to use anymore. Tooling is so important when you're doing technical migration. I really cannot overstate how important it is. If we'd done it all manually, it easily would have taken twice as long. The original script that we used to try and see if the TypeScript migration would work evolved into the TypeScript migration script. And so we'd run that to migrate a particular library or even a subdirectory of a larger flow library. And then we'd give it a manual pass afterwards to fix any kind of NEs and any type errors that had made it through. They also documented it meticulously because they're good people. And we had a space for documenting any issues that came out of that as well and any fixes for those. And those scripts also generated flow types for the libraries that we just migrated, which was super useful, so that any other apps that hadn't yet been migrated would still have types for imported packages. Now, I mentioned that our monorepo has a lot of shared libraries, and those libraries have transitive dependencies on other libraries within the same repo. This is obviously a vast simplification, but effectively we didn't want to be in a position where we'd migrated a library to TypeScript, only to find that some of its dependencies were still in flow, and so there weren't any types. So we wrote another script, because that's apparently what we do, to find packages that were kind of ready to migrate because all their dependencies had been already migrated to TypeScript. And so as we went on, we would unlock packages further down that dependency tree. Now, especially with an incremental migration like this, it became really important to measure our progress, not only so that we could keep morale up, but also that we could see how close we were, or not, to actually finishing. I put together a dashboard that showed the number of flow packages in the repo versus the number of TypeScript packages. And it was a very exciting day when the lines finally crossed over. And I wrote a script, another script, that piggybacked off our kind of ready-to-migrate script, which showed the percentage of files in the repo that had been migrated. And I posted this on Slack every month. And as we got closer towards the end, I posted the number every time the percentage changed. And I kept running it, and I realized it wasn't going past 99, and then I realized it was counting like the config.js files in the root of the repo, so it would never hit 100%. So along with that measurement, you also need milestones, which are checkpoints along the way that indicate significant achievements in your migration. And setting these milestones not only made us feel like we were getting somewhere, but they also helped us communicate our progress to stakeholders in terms that they can understand easily. The first app that we migrated was a milestone. Migrating our business banking app was another one. Migrating BizOps, our customer service app, was the final one. And if you're not setting milestones like these for any projects, not just migrations, like you really should start, because it really makes bigger projects feel a lot more attainable and a lot more digestible as well. Another bend in the road showed up around mid-2023. By this point, we had the whole web discipline working on the migration, and we were still quite a long way from the end. We'd hoped to get it done by Christmas, but it really wasn't looking likely. Now, at Monzo, we tried to foster this environment where there's this expectation that you have kind of what we call discipline work. So web engineers will have web things to do on the side alongside their prioritized teamwork. So they might they're empowered to go to planning and say, oh, I've also got this bit of web work that I'm going to do on Friday afternoon, or something like that. And it might be maintenance, or it might be an upgrade, or it might be a little fix. But especially working in a regulated industry like banking, there's a lot of external deadlines set by regulators. There's other things happening. There's a lot of things going on all over the company. And ultimately, try as we might, this kind of stuff becomes really hard to prioritize. And either way, things were moving very slowly, and there was a real chance that this wouldn't get done. So we'd been roughly aiming for the end of 2023, but with the support of my engineering director, I turned it into a hard deadline. We had to get this finished by the end of the year so we could just move on with our lives. And we ticketed up the remaining work, broke down the remaining apps into tickets, which I then assigned to teams based on kind of code ownership. And I got buy-in from engineering managers and the tech leads of the teams who had web engineers to kind of say, we need to get this done. You need to make sure your team brings this into planning. And so every month I counted up the remaining tickets, I kind of posted an update with our progress, and I made sure to celebrate the teams who had got the most done that month. We also reduced the scope of the migration a bit. So we wouldn't have to migrate every single app to consider it done, only the ones that we worked on the most. And this was a compromise that I didn't super love, but ultimately it was the only way that we were going to get this finished. And yeah, it meant that there would be a bit of flow left in the code base at the end, but it wouldn't affect the build path of the apps that we worked on the most, and people could just migrate them as and when we needed to. We did wonder whether we could just strip out flow completely and just have the remaining stuff in like vanilla JavaScript, imagine. But we realized that to remove Babel, well, that way we could remove Babel if it was just vanilla JavaScript, but to remove flow, we'd still have to run some kind of code mod and then manually go over the output to check for any errors. And so we might as well just migrate it to TypeScript while we're there. So we carried on. We didn't have to get particular buy-in for quite a long time because, as I said, there is a certain expectation at Monzo that we have this work on the side. But once it became really important once we'd proven the value and the fact that we had to get it done. And so without the backing of senior stakeholders, there was a risk that the work just wouldn't be deemed important enough to actually finish. And my engineering director was a really good support here, and with his backing, other less technical stakeholders in the business were more likely to be on side. Let us get on with it. And I brought managers and leadership on board by really clearly articulating the problems we were having now and the benefits that we were expecting at the end. And I had to kind of make it clear that some of these benefits we wouldn't see until we'd done everything. Because people always want to know what the incremental value of something is, and sometimes that's just not the case. Things like compile time improvements, you aren't going to see those until you've done the whole thing. And it really helps if you know what stakeholders care the most about. Some of them are going to be very focused on risk. You know, what's the risk if we don't complete the migration? Others might be more focused on cost or developer velocity. You know, is being on an old technology holding you back? Is it making you less able to ship? Is it holding you back from scaling as an organization? So know who you're pitching to and tailor your argument. Stakeholders are also going to want to know when you're going to see the benefit from all of this hard work. So with some things, as I said, it is 0 to 1, and you don't see the value until it's completely done, whereas other things have more incremental value. And in fact, we did see that a little bit sooner than we'd expected, because even though we couldn't use the new compiler yet, people were able to create their new packages in TypeScript and therefore work in TypeScript day to day, which made things a bit faster, and we were able to upgrade some of our libraries a bit sooner than we'd anticipated. In my opinion, the greatest threat to any migration is not its complexity, but it's changing organizational priorities that mean you can't finish. So it's really important that the powers that be understand the risks of not finishing this migration. It's really easy to think that you can just stop halfway through, put it on pause, just kind of go back to your lives and come back to it later when everything's obviously easier and simpler, but in many cases you're going to end up in a worse position than you were before you started. I'm contractually obliged to show you this XKCD comic about standards here, but you may introduce one new technology to replace everything, but if you don't finish, you've just put another technology on the pile. Good opportunity for a drink break. So maybe you'll do a little bit, and then you need to focus on something else. And then someone else comes along and says, oh, I'm going to use this technology. Or maybe you've got a lot of different teams working on a lot of different parts of a code base, and you're all using slightly different approaches. It's also very common after mergers and takeovers when the parent company takes in all the other companies' systems and code bases, and they all get merged together, and you end up with a monster, well, lots of different tech stacks. When there are 5 different ways of doing the same thing in your code base, how is an engineer supposed to know which one the right one is? And what is their motivation to replace the old stuff with the new stuff if there's still loads of the old stuff? And if someone's paged for an incident, and this particular part of your website uses some bizarre data fetching library, and the rest of it just uses the normal thing, what are they going to do? And also, we're web developers, right? Think about the end user. By adding a new library, are you increasing the bundle size that your user has to download on the other end? You're also much more likely to get buy-in from senior management if you've given a lot of thought to the safety of the migration. So minimizing disruption to business as usual operations, not inconveniencing people too much, and having an escape plan if things go wrong. Because any migration comes with risk, the important thing is how you deal with that risk and prepare yourself for what can go wrong. Because type system migrations, sure, are fairly low risk as they go, especially as we were moving incrementally. That said, it wasn't smooth sailing all the way. We definitely had a few bumps. But from the next section, I've also drawn a bit of inspiration from other migrations that we've done at Monzo that have had a bit of a higher risk. At Monzo, we have a value that says, be hard on problems, not people, which I really like. And it kind of said, things go wrong. And it's nobody's fault. They're usually things that happened that led up to somebody taking an action that led to an incident. So how do we fix those things so they don't happen again? Incidents happen. They are an inevitable consequence of doing things and moving forward. And accept that you will probably have some incidents when you're migrating. We certainly did. The important thing is how you can then recover from them and learn from them so they don't happen again. So we definitely had some bugs when we migrated some of our web things to TypeScript, but then we were able to just roll it back, fix it, and roll it forward again. It might be appropriate to establish a set of guardrails, which are points at which you decide that you're not happy anymore and you want to roll back. So if you've migrated your website to a new platform, for example, you might say, okay, if load times consistently exceed X, then we're going to roll back and have another look. And you need to make sure you have these metrics across your old and your new systems so you can compare them accurately. So you might want to have some dashboards alongside each other with the old and the new systems. And so we recently migrated our customer support call tooling to a new platform. So we had side-by-side dashboards of the old and the new, which we were running side-by-side in production for a while. And so you have things like your call answer rate, queue length, the percentage of agents who are currently on a call. And if those numbers are looking vastly different across the old and the new implementations, you know something's gone wrong. And we set alarms on those metrics as well so that we didn't have to sit staring at those dashboards all day. And we worked with people in our operations team to understand what reasonable levels for those metrics would look like. And we had those guardrails that said, okay, if this percentage drops below that, then we will roll back. And if you do hit one of those guardrails and you make the decision to roll back, you do need to make sure you've got a really good, well-documented plan for doing so. And anyone should be able to do this, not just you, especially if they're paged in the middle of the night. And yeah, okay, with the TypeScript migration, we didn't have a rollback plan, which I realized as I was writing this talk, but there wasn't any going back for us. And as I said, it's fairly low risk. Like, it's just JavaScript in the end, right? We'd validated pretty early on that there wasn't much impact having both TypeScript and Flow compilers, like maybe a couple of seconds extra onto the build. But other migrations do have a lot more at stake. So my colleague Sahil Patel did a fantastic talk at Staff Plus conference last year about migrations at scale. And he works in our infrastructure team. And they do a lot of migrations on all of the microservices that power the entire bank. So when kind of critical infrastructure is in the hot path for your migration, you need to be really, really sure that there is a clearly defined rollback plan. And this might be a full rollback completely to the beginning, or it might be a partial rollback to a point that you know is safe. And there's going to come a time when it's not safe to roll back anymore. And this is a point of no return. And usually that should be closer to the end of the migration. but generally risks will tend to show themselves earlier on in the process anyway. But make sure that you've documented those as well, because it can be really dangerous if somebody actually rolls something back after the point of no return. It can be quite destructive if someone's done that. And just like growing out a bad haircut, there's going to be this really awkward in-between phase where you've got the old and the new technologies running alongside each other, and you're going to have to maintain and make changes to both of them. But keep on going, because it will get better. You might have to accept some temporary slowdowns in some processes, like additional build steps, all of that kind of stuff. But eventually you will get to the point where you can remove the old system. And we did it. In December, thank you. In December last year, I was running that migration statistics script more and more frequently to see that number ticking up to like 97, 98, 99, but never 100. But I ended up PRing a change towards Christmas that was just like the remaining flow files in the main BizOps app. And when I came back from my break in January, I decided to see what would happen if I removed Babel. And I was expecting to have a whole load of stuff to do, stuff that we'd forgotten to migrate. But no, it worked. It just worked. When does that ever happen? That was great. Everything's been downhill from there. But yeah, no, the benefits do speak for themselves. So the compiler is faster, both in development and in CI. We were able to upgrade those critical packages a lot sooner. Concerningly, we found a lot of type errors when we migrated to Typescript that Flow had just kind of, ignored, stuck its fingers in its ears. Lots of legitimately missing parameters and props. Full of confidence, but now we fixed those all, and also VS Code just works a lot faster with TypeScript. So yeah, everyone's a winner. When you do finish, and you will finish, make sure that you celebrate it as well. It's really, really important to celebrate your successes. It's not an easy task, and it can take a really long time, as we showed, but recognize everyone who contributed and saw it through with you. Post messages in public forums, embarrass people publicly. This one was in our company-wide announcements channel. And make sure engineering leadership know what you've all achieved as well. We got stickers made, as I said. Everyone loves a sticker. If you didn't have a sticker, did it really happen? And we had a little party, and I got some TypeScript cakes made, and it was wonderful. So that's our story of how we migrated to TypeScript. How about your story? Next time a migration opportunity presents itself, here are some things that you should think about before you take the leap. The first question you should always ask yourself is, do you even need to do this migration at all? As time goes on, will you be in the same place, or will you be in a worse place? If you're going to be in a worse place, then yes, you should probably do something about it. If you're going to be in the same place, then I encourage you to think long and hard about the benefits that you're expecting. Because a decision to introduce a new technology needs to be really, really, really well considered. You need to think about the benefits you're expecting to get from it in relation to the number of developer hours required to actually make it happen. How much do you value that benefit in relation to the time it takes to get it done? And is there a point at which the effort outweighs the value? And this definitely gets more of an issue the larger your code base gets and the more complex your organizational needs are as well. And for TypeScript, that compilation time was a really, really nice bonus, but in reality, we knew we couldn't afford to be stuck on an obsolete type system that fewer and fewer people knew how to use. And it did take us a really long time to get there, but it's going to continue to be worth it every time we upgrade a package, and there's types for it, or we hire somebody and they've already used TypeScript. And remember that technology isn't free once you've implemented it either. There's a lot of maintenance to think about. Who's going to look after the new technology, right? Who's going to stay on top of vulnerabilities and be on call if that's relevant? Who's going to do the major version upgrades? Who's going to debug it when things go wrong? And again, they will go wrong. Make sure you don't just think you can throw it over the wall to your infrastructure team and they'll just look after it for you, because chances are it's a completely different tech stack to anything they've ever used. And does more than one person in your organization know how this technology works? And if you were to leave tomorrow, would anyone be able to pick up where you left off? Are the other engineers in your company reasonably ready to learn how to use this new technology? So they have to have the time to learn how to use the new thing. For something like GraphQL, which I know I keep coming back to, but it is a great example because it requires a complete paradigm shift in the way that you build APIs. And so if your back-end engineers don't have the time to learn how to deal with this kind of thing, then you're going to end up just doing REST, but with GraphQL on top. And then you even going to be able to hire people to use a new technology if it's obscure enough. If you started brand new today and you chose some cool new technology to hire people in, to build your code base in, you know that you're going to be going through exactly the same thing a few years down the line, right? Because that's how the cycle goes. There's always going to be new technology, in the same way that any code merged into main is instantly legacy code. And you don't have to do a migration every time something new comes out. Think very carefully about your motivations. Because there's a really big difference between picking a new tool because it's genuinely better and picking it because it seems cool, right? And many of us have built lots of workarounds and like horrible hacks to get around functionality that just doesn't exist anywhere, and that's fine. Things get developed all the time that solve those problems, and then we can replace them, and we're all happy. And things become end of life as well. So we might put off major version upgrades of things because we're scared of the amount of work that's required to actually do them. But there does come a point where you're at risk of security vulnerabilities that you need to patch, and they are not. And once that comes end of life, they're not patching those vulnerabilities anymore. So you're at risk. And things that seem like a good idea at the time might end up being a poor decision. Have you ended up with the technological equivalent of HD DVD in your code base? And for those of you who don't remember HD DVD, this was the competitor to Blu-ray. And they came out in the early 21st century as the kind of high-definition version of DVD. And Blu-ray, of course, won the war of the standards, and HD DVD vanished, never to be seen again. If you had an Xbox 360, then you had an HD DVD player. Many of us will have bet on the wrong horse when it comes to technology choices, and for us, Flow was our HD DVD, unfortunately. We made a choice in the past, and it seemed like a really good idea at the time. We had our reasons for picking it. We certainly weren't the only ones to have made that decision, and it turned out not to have been the right thing. These things happen. And sometimes a library or a technology will become deprecated in favor of something else. And as we found, that can have a knock-on effect in terms of your ability to upgrade things or take advantage of advances in new technologies, for example. As well as a load of good reasons, there are also plenty of bad reasons to do a migration as well. Sometimes companies migrate to new technologies because it seems like that's just what the industry is doing now. Don't assume that just because a well-respected tech company is using something that you should too. It doesn't mean you're the same thing. And when everyone was adopting React, I wonder how many of them actually stopped to think about whether they really needed a technology that was built for a Facebook-scale application. Right, so we use it internally at Monzo for our customer service app, but that is huge and complex and has a lot of different contributors. And I actually think it's a pretty good use case. But for things like static marketing websites, do you really need React? Just use a static site generator. Maybe you joined a new company or came onto a new project where they're using a technology that you don't like. We've all been there. I was given some good advice by my boss at a new company once when I joined, and I said I didn't like a library that they'd chosen. He said, think about whether it is worse or whether it's just different from what you're used to before. Live with it for a few months and then make up your mind. Is it actually worse or is it just different? I think that's really good advice. In my case, I do think I was right and it was worse. But the principle is a really good one, right? Is it actually worse? And even if it is better, do you reasonably have the time do you have a good plan for how you're going to get there? Does it make sense for, say, a small startup to spend all this time migrating to a better library just because you think it is better? Or do you just need to live with it for a bit longer? Maybe there's a new language you've been playing with in your spare time and you think it's really cool and you want to use it all the time. Or there's a hot new framework that everyone's talking about and it seemed like it would be good for some reason or another. There are so many new libraries and frameworks and technologies around, and they'll come and go, many of them, before you've even had a chance to try them out. And it's really important to consider whether a new technology will actually be better than what you've got now. Because there's nothing wrong with boring, right? Boring works. Boring is tried and tested, and boring is easier to maintain. There's a fantastic essay by Dan McKinley called Choose Boring Technology, which you can read at boringtechnology.club, and you should, please read it. He says, boring should not be conflated with bad. There's technology out there that is both boring and bad. You should not use any of that. But there are many choices of technology that are boring and good, or at least good enough. MySQL is boring. Postgres is boring. PHP is boring. Python is boring. Memcached is boring. Cron is boring. These technologies, boring though they might be, are familiar and reliable. People know how to use them. And there's lots of documentation. They're very well maintained. They're not new and exciting, that's for sure, but they will work and they will do what you need them to do. I hope these lessons have given you a framework, no pun intended, to tackle your next migration, whether you're at a big company like us or a small agency. And remember, when you do a migration, if you do a migration, do it wisely. Don't be afraid to be boring, and maybe you don't even need to do it at all. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sophie. So honest and a lot of lessons, and it's kind of really, really incredible. We have so many questions.
Wow.
I mean, oh my God, I didn't know where to start. Probably going to start from the beginning. One of the questions that came up from Sasha right away is, so when would be the best point to start a migration project? When the pain is too much and you can't upgrade anything anymore? Or right when you start to see problems coming, or even sooner? And also, maybe that was a different question, how do you convince C-levels, since tech debt usually is not a high priority?
Okay, so the first question, when do you start a migration, is a really good one. I think sometimes we don't realize we need it until we're feeling the pain and we're in the middle of it. So I think it can be really helpful to firstly keep an eye on package releases for the big, really critical libraries that you depend on. So make sure that you understand when things are going to become end of life, because it can sneak up on you. And suddenly it'll be like, oh, end of life is in 6 months, and then you'll be scrabbling around, realizing you need to do something about it. But I would say, when you start to notice that things are becoming a problem, see if you can try and understand what kind of, how long has that been a problem, and how much worse is it getting, and how quickly is it getting worse. Because if it's a really slow burn, and you can kind of put it off for a little longer, like, you can't just drop everything and pick it up, right? You need to think about how urgently do we need to fix this? Is this something that we can prioritize as a team, maybe after we've finished this project? Or is it something that we need to treat as an incident and deal with right away? So make sure that you, pick it up early, and try and understand more about how long you've got until it becomes a real problem.
Right. And the second one was,
yes.
So if you have a situation, this I think, something that you often have, if you have a tech debt, and you basically try to convince the C-level people that this is important to address that, but it's not really a high priority. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so not all tech debt is created equal, right? There's kind of good and there's bad tech debt. And good tech debt helps us to get where we need to go quicker by making some kind of shortcuts, taking some shortcuts and making some choices that we might not make if we're kind of trying to be perfect coders, but when is any code perfect? I think tech debt only becomes a problem when it is holding you back from something, or making it harder to make changes, or making you unable to upgrade things. Right, if it just makes you kind of go every time you look at the code, like, I'm sorry, you have to live with that. Like, it's not actually causing any problems. So it's like I said before, you have to know what motivates the people in the senior positions, whether they, get to know them personally as well. Like, literally have coffee with them, talk to them, get to know them, and understand. If they work with other people that you know better, try and ask them, like, what does this person care about, basically? Is it money? Is it risk? I know that my engineering director will listen if I tell him that something is posing a risk to our ability to operate, right? He cares a lot about that. So I'm always going to shape my arguments in that kind of way, because I know that that's the thing that kind of gets through to him the most.
One question in bold. That's kind of statement right there. What was that state management library?
Oh, I mean, that's actually, it was just like literally for a joke, but it's always going to be Redux, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. There was another one that just came in too here. So here we go. How do you identify the right path for migration? Currently, we have a huge website with many legacy systems, and we struggle to find a way to make any progress, as there are many dependencies and a lot of undocumented code.
Feel that pain. Yeah, I think there's always so many ways that migration could go. I think identify where you want to be and have a look at whether there are ways that you can get there incrementally. So with something with a code base of that size and with that many kind of bits, I would definitely suggest going incrementally. But sit down and have a think about how you could get there. Like, have a hack, see how you can migrate bits of it, sure, but do come up with a plan and make sure that you have a roadmap for that. And that way, if you've got the roadmap, you've got the tickets, you've got everything kind of laid out in front of you, then it's going to be a lot safer than just kind of hacking around and seeing what happens. But you might want to identify a few different approaches and just try them out and see which one makes the most sense, especially with all the other work that you've presumably got going on as well.
Yeah, but it's always so nice to see, like, we post it on Slack, on Teams and whatnot, and you have this big celebration because everybody has heard of it, or it was an agenda for so many people, and then you're going to have this big success moment, but the path there is hard. And so Kieran is wondering, are there actually any typical signs or smells that would make you suspect that a migration should be avoided after all?
Ah, interesting. I think if someone can't make a very good argument for why you should do it, if you've already started it and you don't really know what the benefits are, or what the benefits are as they apply to your organization as well, because what the benefits are on the website of the tool don't necessarily translate to the benefits that you'll be experiencing from them. I think, yeah, if you don't have a clear end point, or you don't know what the benefits are in relation to how long it's actually going to take you to do it. Also, make sure that the other engineers in your company know that it's happening and are also on board with it as well. But you need that documentation and you need a plan. So if you haven't got either of those things, you need to take a step back and think about whether you still want to be going ahead with it.
How do you decide when to deprecate or decommission a legacy system, and when to announce it? Do you do it in stages? Do you run it across months or even years?
It's a really good question. I think you need to make sure that you've, again, documentation here. It all comes down to documentation. I feel like 90% of engineering is just good communication. You need to make sure that you're communicating several times over. Like, I've had so many times when I've posted something ahead of time, and then someone's come to me and said, oh, what about X, Y, Z? And I said, oh, I posted this. Of course, they didn't see it because Slack is so noisy that they missed it, or maybe they were on holiday that week or something. So, like, you need to make sure that you've done everything you can to make sure it's not just humans as well telling people this is happening. This is why we lean on things like linting, like kind of semgrep and things like that, static checks, automate poking people repeatedly to remind them that this thing isn't allowed anymore. So with things like that, if it's a tool that you can use a static check for, you might want to turn it, first make it a warning so it doesn't block CI, it doesn't fail checks, it just says, warning, this is becoming deprecated. Use deprecated annotations in your code as well, because IDEs will pick up on those. And then, once you're ready to actually deprecate that system and move to the new one, you can make it fail CI and make it an error level annotation, and that will stop it.
Yeah, every time I think about supporting legacy, it's always like maintaining two systems at the same time, fixing bugs here and there. It sounds really daunting. But in the end, it was a big success, right? And it took 2 years. But I think still, this is kind of what I actually just try to figure out. So every now and again, you realize, okay, this was successful, but we probably should have done a few things differently. So when you look back at this big project with like 2 years in work, what do you wish you would have done differently? Or what would you do differently next time? Hopefully not next year.
Yeah. I wish that I wish that we hadn't tried to do it as a side job. I think it was worth a try, but I think naively we thought we could just do it a little bit at a time and that people would magically find the time to do it. But I wish that we had proven its value early on and then taken the time to actually make an argument for it up front and say either we need a team to do this or we need to make sure that all of our web team are doing this and we want to do it by this time and this is how we're going to get there. I don't think we had a clear enough plan from the beginning. Once we had all those tickets and all those plans, I think everything became a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess it might be a question from a concerned citizen again. Sorry for asking, but I'm just too curious. So why did you leave Monzo and then return back to it later?
So some of my colleagues started a startup, actually, a really cool startup. And I decided, now or never, I want to see what the startup life is like. And it turns out I just prefer bigger companies. I like roles where I can do more leadership-y things. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's perfectly reasonable.
It's not that exciting, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I think that the concerned citizen is not concerned anymore. You can just write citizen. That's fine.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be concerned anymore. That's okay. All right. Well, if you have any more questions about migration or legacy or whatnot, you can also find Sophie next to the fireplace. Without fire, just the fireplace, right? Thank you so much for being with us, Sophie.
Thank you.